This is Linux In-Laws, a podcast on free Libre open source software, broadcasting from the United Kingdom and Germany.
Welcome to something called Linux In-Laws Season 2, Episode 43, Martin. This is one episode after 42.
Yeah.
What? Hold on.
That's what happens when you get to 42, yeah.
Exactly. So, Martin, any thoughts on the successor of said 42 episode in terms of the numbers?
No, it's we've obviously passed the magical number, so it's all downhill from here.
Glad to hear this. Anything else that comes to mind when we're talking about downhill? And I mean, needless to say, the world situation would come to mind as in geopolitics, stock prices. We are recording this, by the way. This is another time-traveling episode. We're recording this in 2026, as of March 2026, and the world is almost on the brink of annihilation. Is that the word I'm looking for? No, we're joking. No, it's not that bad, people. So try to continue with your ordinary lives, but this is not an episode about living, but rather about open source software. And with that, I would like to hand this over to our guests. But before we do this, we should probably say what tonight's topic is, Martin.
We should. We are going to be talking about a fairly new project, but a very well-supported and important project, nevertheless.
Let me guess, it's called Linux, and it has been in existence for the last 30 plus years.
No, it's even better organized and better supported than Linux. Yeah.
I see. So, Martin, what is tonight's topic in that case?
So we're going to be talking about Valky tonight, and we have two excellent guests for that.
Excellent. So, Martin, what is Valky for the two people in the audience who do not know this?
Very quickly then, Valky is an in-memory, predominantly in-memory data structure store when you need low latency responses or high throughput applications.
Me included, of course, was a joke. Valky is actually a fork of something called Martin.
Well, you say that, but I think it's no longer a fork now.
We will go into that in a minute, but let's take down a trip down memory lane, just in case.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about the background of the project in a minute anyway.
Okay. But before we do this, Martin, we should probably say that, full disclosure, we met at a company called Redis all those years ago.
Yep.
And the
same as one of our guests, in fact.
Exactly. The podcast called Linux In-Laws was actually conceived while being at an offsite at that company in late 2019. So this is something like a little bit of a going down the memory lane for Martin and myself, I reckon, when it comes down to what Valky came from originally. But before I rant on too much, let's hand this over to our guests, Dmitry and Kyle. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'll go ahead. Hi, I'm Kyle. I'm a developer advocate for the Valky project. AWS pays my bills, but I work exclusively with Valky.
The Valky project, right?
Valky project, yeah.
Hello, my name is Dmitry Polyakovsky. I work at Oracle Cloud. I'm the technical lead for CI Cache, and that's the day job. But I'm also a longtime Redis enthusiast, and Kyle and I actually met years ago at the Redis conference and kept in touch since then. And I'm also contributing to the Valky project by maintaining the Valky Rust module SDK. Happy to talk about that later.
Excellent. But before we continue, we should probably, for the 1.5 members of the audience who do not know what Redis is, never mind Valky, explain a little bit of the history of the two projects and why Valky came into existence about, I reckon, a year and a half ago.
Sure, Kyle, you want to take it?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah. I've been, for most of this, I don't know, I've been using Redis, started using Redis like 2012, which is a long time ago. So it started
early versions, right? Is that?
Yeah, no, I think I came in when clustering was like controversial, like the first version of cluster. So, it started, it had a long history of like twisty different ownerships and sponsors early on. It was an open source project. Salvatore Sanfilippo created it way back. I say this, and I think it's like 2009. Don't quote me on that. But the first version was written in Tcl, like TCL, the obscure programming language that really no one uses. And like not many people use that version. And then it was started rewritten in C, and it kind of, like got to be really popular in a few kind of developer communities. It like the kind of story that I've always heard, this is before my time with the project, that it started like, it really blew up in the Ruby community. Like Ruby at that time was really popular, but it wasn't very fast. And so out of that, people started integrating it like crazy in Ruby because it was able to make their applications scale and move faster. And then fast forward a few years, it started to grow in prominence. A company came along based in Israel. It didn't employ Salvatore originally. And they started offering it as a service, and then they started employing Salvatore. And that became Redis Labs, where I worked and where I met some folks in this room, and then eventually Dmitry. And I worked there doing developer advocacy over there as well. And so that's Redis, right? And like that existed for a while. Around 2020, Salvatore left the first time. We'll get to that. And they kind of came up with this community governance. And the community governance had some representatives from different companies and included Redis as well. Redis had the kind of most number of seats there. And after that, that went on for several years. And then last year, in kind of a sudden turn of events, they just said, hey, guess what? We're not doing community governance anymore. And guess what? It's not going to be open source. And that caused a big, let's say, brouhaha in the industry. The people who were on the community governance and some active contributors to Redis forked the project, and that became what is Valky today. Since then, there's been some twists and turns. Salvatore came back to Redis late last year in a different capacity, not as like a core contributor. He was I think I may have left this out, but he was like the benevolent dictator for Redis for most of its existence. He came back in kind of weird circumstances. There was a big dust up around the licensing and the ownership of the client libraries. And then that kind of precipitated him coming back. And then just over a month ago, they still have these 2 proprietary licenses they were using, and then they added additionally an HEPL license. So that's like the shortest version of the history of the project, I guess I could give. And throughout the time, there's been lots of technology changes to it. It's no longer written in Tcl. And Valky and Redis coexist now as 2 different projects, both open source. Valky's got a number of backers. The people who kind of like formed the project, the TSC, include people from AWS, Google, Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei, and Ericsson.
Verizon. Ericsson, sorry.
Verizon's not on the TSC.
No, yeah. I meant to say about Ericsson.
Yeah, TSC, Technical Steering Committee.
And what is the Technical Steering Committee for the 2 people on the audience who haven't heard this term yet?
They're the technical decision makers. So, if somebody posts any type of change or anything they want to do to the project that is what we call a major decision, that would be like adding things to the API, changing how something fundamentally works. The TSC is the people who discuss it and make the ultimate decision on that.
So architecture,
they basically vote on what the changes
and details, essentially.
Yeah. So I mean, like it's a completely open source project. Valky is a Linux Foundation project. I think I left that out. And it's BSD3 clause license, which is the original license of Redis. And that's the way the governance works right now. We have a very minimal governance in the project, right? There is individual maintainers in the project that do different things. Like Dmitry, he'll introduce himself a little bit further in a minute. He does the Rust SDK. I'm a maintainer of the website. stuff like that, right? People, they will still, like TSC will actually have a sway if there's a big change in those, but that's individual maintainers. We're pretty free to make the technical decisions that are best for our little corner of the project.
And before we go into technical details, maybe we should spend some more time on why exactly Valky was forked, because I reckon that all of our listeners are familiar with these minute details of what exactly happened and why this caused such an uproar in the community. And I reckon the foundation was laid with the licensing of certain modules back in, 2016 or something?
Yeah, that's going way back. Yeah, there is a whole history. So first you have to explain modules. Like Valky has in Redis, we'll do it historically. Redis had this kind of like core of functionality, and a lot of people would try to go and add functionality to it, and Salvatore would say like, no, like that would make it big and bloated. And so then they came out with this modules SDK, which allows you to like build extensions to it. And the extensions basically allow it to be kind of a first-class citizen inside the database, right? So you can create commands and data types and all these things that are fundamental to how Valky works in a module format. And then Redis Labs, the company that was sponsoring Redis at the time and employing Salvatore, created these series of modules. Some of them are very functional. And they were originally licensed AGPL. Things come full circle. And then they did this thing called the Commons Clause. And that was a boogeyman in open source circles for a long time. This was basically a source available license. And then that kind of clawed back, and it came out with this idea of the RSAL, the Redis Labs, or RL, Redis Labs source available. I always get the acronym backwards.
Source available license, RSAL.
RSAL.
Yeah. No, Redis source available license, RSAL.
Redis source available license. Yeah, RS. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Redis source available license. That's just for some reason alphabet soup in my head. Which was a source available license. Like you couldn't contribute to it very meaningfully without signing CLAs and doing other things like that. And then eventually, when they changed the license, they became RSAL plus SSPL. So that's a license that I think MongoDB popularized, where it's a kind of copyless left source available license, if that makes sense, where you have to contribute back everything that touches it functionally. I'm not a license expert, so there's much more nuance to that. And then now we've come full circle, and they're now AGPL. So it's a really interesting historical arc. But yeah, so that's where it all started. This module kind of like people started to distrust Redis Labs, I think, at that time. And then
I think they
doubled.
I think the shift process is pretty critical, because I remember when modules came out like 5-6 years ago, and they said, modules will be licensed differently, and there was a lot of concern about did Redis change its license? And I remember a very straight press release from them saying like, no, it's only the modules. The core Redis will always be through open source, and the change last year, I admit it, gave a lot of people concerns.
That's a key point, Dmitry. That promise that was made that said, and I don't want to paraphrase the exact thing, but it was, people took it as a commitment that the core of Redis would never be anything else but the BSD3 clause license, which is really a permissive license, right? Like you can do a whole lot with that, even compared to AGPL, which has a lot of lawyers don't like for a variety of lawyer reasons.
And it makes
what's sorry, Damien? Karen.
No, I'm saying the BSD license for Valky makes it possible for myself and other people to contribute to the code, contribute to the project, and still kind of like make it of value to our employers and our day jobs. It gives that.
But before we go into that, we should probably go into the history and what exactly happened last year in 2024 and why Valky eventually was forked.
Well, we can't speak as to why the Redis Inc. changed the light, but we can speak as to why the Valky project was formed.
No, I mean, to cut a long story short, essentially that BSD license promise was broken last year, as in 2024, when Redis, the company who owns the core IP, decided to move away from that 3-clause BSD that was always been at the very heart/core of Redis. The reasons maybe in the history books going forward at some stage, but needless to say, let's put it this way, it didn't exactly increase the joy in the community that used Redis for caching and quite a few other use cases. Hence, Valky was forked, I think, 14 days after this announcement. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Linux Foundation stepped in a couple of days later, giving Valky a home.
Yeah, it was really stunning how quickly this happened.
And also, like literally, like the week after that, there was like a Linux Foundation conference in Seattle, and we just had a table there, which was like super awesome because it just happened so fast. Yeah, it was that one.
A Valky table, you mean? Or...
Yeah, Valky.
Oh, nice.
It's funny, you can kind of chart, this is how I remember it, the announcement that they were going to change their license was during KubeCon.
Yes.
And then by the time Open Source Summit came along in Seattle, which Seattle was just like an amazing happenstance. That's where the conference was because, one, the AWS folks were based there. Dmitry, I think it's okay to say that you're based there. And then some of the Google folks were even based there. And it was just like, this is like a core group of people. And we got people from flying in from all sorts of places. I flew in from Canada. We had some other folks from Canada as well. Kind of just like booked last minute tickets. And I was like 3D printing our logo minutes before I had to leave, for the conference. And we were able to pull it all together. But I can tell you that, that took a lot of effort, right? Like everybody basically dropped everything that they were doing at the kind of groups that were contributing to this and just like focused on it across the industry, right? Like to get that done was.
But the location, we liked the location, and the fun fact is that I've known Madeline for years. She's one of the lead engineer on AWS, and also met Ping, lead engineer on Google Cloud. And what I was actually trying to do in Seattle was restart the Seattle Redis meetup, which I was running before COVID, and then during COVID, obviously things took a break. And then when Valky happened last year, I'm like, you know what, we're gonna do a Valky meetup. So that also
this
gave
is
us
quite
a
successful, isn't it? The Valky meetup, actually.
Yeah, we've had some really nice events, and it's just super convenient that Oracle, Google, and AWS are here. So we have some remote folks who are active participants in the community, but it's nice to have this geographic center of gravity and like get together for lunch once in a while. Just purely convenient.
But then something strange/odd happened at the very end of 2024. Salvatore Sanfilippo, the original creator of Redis, decided to rejoin Redis. The official line, of course, he never kind of left the company. He just left the project as a maintainer. At least the company law, I may be wrong, Redis lawyers don't get in touch. We don't have any money, so don't even try. Yeah. Jokes aside, the point that I'm trying to make here is that after a long absence, Salvatore Sanfilippo decided to rejoin the company. And then, let's put it this way, I reckon it's fair to say that some internal discussions took place during the first quarter of something called 2024, and eventually, apparently, he decided. Sorry, 2025. Did I say 2025? As in this year, exactly. So after he joined at the end of last year, he managed to sway some people internally to relicense the code base to something called
that's not quite right.
Yeah.
They didn't relicense it. They didn't relicense it.
They put they slapped on another license, right? In terms of the
it's a triple license.
Okay.
Triple license. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not relicensed. It's not just open source. It is if you go and you try to contribute to it, the CLA will explain to you exactly what licenses that it's under. But no, it's 3 licenses. So.
We should probably now explain why this is important. When they slapped on, and needless to say, links were in the show notes for this, when they slapped on the 3rd license called AGPL and the Affero GNU public license, the idea was, of course, to keep the hyperscalers at bay. And to say, we do have at least one employee of a hyperscaler in this episode. So let me do the explaining. To be on the fair side, no jokes aside. And of course, this is one of the opinions in the marketplace, I'm tempted to say. The hyperscalers all had their own fork of Redis. At AWS, it's called Elastic Cache. At Microsoft, it's called Azure Cache for Redis.
Yeah, well,
and at Google,
you can't call it a fork, right? They have because those are not code bases that are publicly available.
Exactly.
Maybe.
They don't release it. Yes. So they use this fork internally without releasing the code base back to the community. And Google uses something called Memory Store. Needless to say, these code bases, as I said, are not put back on GitHub, but rather deeply embedded in their cloud infrastructure. And it's probably fair to say that all of these hyperscalers that I just mentioned make a fair bit of money from these managed services that essentially represent a Redis and a little bit more on top. And the idea was, of course, with the license change, with the initial license change, so to speak, from a Redis perspective, or Redis Labs even perspective, because that, I reckon, even happened before the name change, to keep these at bay in terms of, we start with the modules, and then eventually we will license also the core, making sure that the hyperscalers cannot avail of our investments in the IP of a code base called Redis. And that's precisely the reason why Redis as a company moved more and more away from the original 3-clause BSD license. And I'm tempted to say genius move of a Salvatore Sanfilippo was actually to say, no, look, we have these proprietary licenses, but why don't we add another license, namely the Affero GPL, to this mix, because the Affero GPL has a couple of traits, or advantages, I'm tempted to say, even being a little bit biased. A, it's OSI compliant, as in the open source initiative has blessed this license with the official rubber stamp in terms of it's compliant to their licensing terms. Needless to say, links in the show notes. We won't go into the details. There is a blatant teaser. There is a full episode on open source licenses for those people who cannot get to sleep and suffer from severe bouts of insomnia. A couple of years back, as I said, links will be in the show notes. But suffice it to say, what the Affero GPL actually constitutes is that anybody who touches such a licensed code base has also to open source any component talking to this code base. And it's probably fair to say, and this is my personal opinion, if you are a hyperscaler, the one thing you don't want to do, you don't want to open source your infrastructure ecosystem that talks to such a managed service, left, right, and center, and top and bottom, because this is essentially your crown jewels. This is how you make money from providing such code bases as a managed service. And that was actually the, I think, idea behind Salvatore, to sway a couple of people inside Redis to slap on the AGPL on said code base, so that on the one side they would have an OSI compliant license in terms of the open source community using Redis was quite happy because it's OSI compliant, but at the same time keeping the hyperscalers at bay. This is probably worth explaining a little bit in detail so that everybody knows why this happened and what the background is. But back to you, Kyle and Dmitry.
Yeah. So one thing, though, it's important to understand about what happened is if you take like the kind of not even long view, like 24-month view, Redis went from a permissive license, not a copyleft license, but a permissive license with community governance, right? And that's actually really important. The community governance part is really, really important. And the license change, of course, was one of the things that led to Valky. But I think also the dissolving of the community governance is really, really important. That means that whomever is contributing to it, they don't really have a say in what happens if there's not a community governance, right? So as an example, you could have situations where somebody might want to do something that conflicts with a roadmap item that the company itself has. The company ultimately has the full say. So without community governance, you can contribute, but you can't meaningfully direct the project. And they then went to this period where they weren't open source at all. There's no open source license available for it, for any kind of like current development versions. And now they've added this AGPL, so a copyleft license, which has different restrictions on it. Certainly not considered a permissive license like BSD3 clause. And there's still no community governance. And they have this thing called a CLA, which I've mentioned before, a contributor license agreement, which is a legal document that talks about how, who gets the rights to that code that you just wrote, right? Like that's what the CLA does. So really, it's not where it was before, right? It isn't the same thing. And I think that's the false equivalency that I think drives me nuts. Be like, oh, it's open source again. Everything's happy, joy. They basically took something away from you and want you to be happy about it. That doesn't, that's not, don't easily forget what was lost in that, less than 2 year span, right? So it's important to have that context, right? Redis is
it's an important point, right? That the whole large amount of the contributors actually went to Valky, right, when that happened last year. So that's license change or not, the Redis project is no longer the same as it was a year and a half ago, right?
That's right.
I think we've done enough on licensing. So maybe we should talk a little bit more about modules. And
but Martin, we can do more.
No, we have a whole episode on this. We can just put it in the show notes. Can listen to that.
In that case, let's continue on modules. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So we call them modules in Redis and Valky, but lots of other databases have the same thing. Postgres has extensions and things, really, right? So Carl already explained it earlier, but I think it's probably worth you explaining, Dmitry, why you built the Rust SDK in the first place, right? The Rust module SDK, and what its use is for yourself.
Okay, so do want to be transparent. We actually are building the Valky modular Rust SDK on top of the Redis modular Rust SDK. That we also forked that. So again, just want to give credit to the engineers who did the original work. But the reason the reason I personally been excited at modules is that the first time 7 years ago, I think, when they were first announced, I was just really intrigued by this idea of like, oh man, Redis is really cool, but I wish it did this, and it can't, because it just doesn't make sense for the core product. And then most came along. I remember using Redis search module and like literally emailing one of the developers at Redis Labs with questions, and he was very responsive. Anyway, but the challenges, of course, is that for the module you have to run your own infrastructure, so that inhibited my ability to really implement them in applications that I was building, because I was often using a managed cloud service. Anyway, but when I joined OCI and eventually I became a tech lead, and eventually we launched the OCI cache service. Again, this idea just kept coming back in my mind, is that, again, how do we extend the open source code with to better integrate it into the cloud infrastructure, and also the idea of memory safety and other dangers, shall we say? I mean, I don't want to say dangerous. C is a powerful language, but just like you have to know how to use it properly, right? Anyway, but the idea of building modules was very interesting to me, and I was interested in Rust because of its memory safety features and just some of the other aspects of the development ecosystem around it. So I started experimenting with the Redis module Rust SDK long ago, and I liked some of the possibilities it offered. And when we started building modules for Redis and later for the Valky software engines, I was very excited to use the Rust, and then when Valky project happened, fork the Redis module SDK to become the Valky module Rust SDK. So that was I hope that was a reasonable answer. I know it went on.
Did you did you ever write any modules in C before that? Just out of interest.
A little bit, yeah. I built a few.
Okay.
I built a few, and just again, it was like I really like the Rust ecosystem. The tooling, the process of dependency management was very nice, and it really helped me, take some of the open source Rust crates and integrate them into my modules that I needed to build and be much more productive. So right now I've published over the last year, I've published several updates to the what was the fork of the Redis module at Rust SDK, what is now Valky module of Rust SDK. And I have a few more ideas. In fact, about a month ago, Kyle and I published a blog on the Valky website, kind of talking about all the changes in the Valky module Rust SDK and some of the ideas for the future. And other developers have also been contributing to the Valky module Rust SDK. It's truly a very collaborative effort with engineers from different cloud vendors, but also outside of cloud world contributing.
Given the fact that Redis took a very serious look at Rust about almost 10 years ago, because Redis Search and some other modules were the first ones to be re-implemented in Rust all those years ago. What are the major differences between the Valky fork of the Rust crate and the original Redis one?
So actually, I believe Redis Search is still written in C, but the Redis Labs did build several modules in Rust, particularly, for example, their JSON module was built. The V1 of the JSON was built in C, I think, but the view of JSON was built in Rust. So some of the differences in the Valky Rust SDK versus the Redis Rust SDK, just the changes we made over the last year. We really wanted to support some of the new APIs that are available in Valky 7.2 and 8, and I actually haven't been following the Rust SDK development as closely the last year, the Redis Rust SDK. But when we started working with the Valky module Rust SDK, we just found out that there were certain underlying engine APIs that were not yet available. So we just implemented those. So now, basically the development process, if you use Valky module Rust SDK, which, by the way, we also do put a lot of effort to make it backwards compatible. So if you want to take the Valky module Rust SDK and build a module that will run with, let's say, Redis 7 or even Redis 6.2, you will be able to do it. Obviously, not everything will be supported, but we try to take advantage of the Rust feature to enable or disable certain things.
So on the subject of Redis compatibility, there are obviously a whole bunch of Redis modules out there, right?
We try to be backwards compatible, but I think we've added some interesting features. For example, we've added some new features to improve client information. We added support for authentication callbacks. We added some additional validations. We added support to implement your own filters. So again, all the things that were possible in C modules.
Right.
But the functionality for which was not available in the Rust module SDK. So we just built enough code to make it easier. We added some certain event handlers. So if you, for example, you have a client that disconnects, you can now write a little bit of Rust code that will do something.
Okay, so basically the Rust SDK was somewhat behind the module.
Yes, the Redis. Right. Yeah, exactly. There was some stuff added in C, which was available to you if you wanted to write C modules, but not if you wanted to write Rust.
But there are no plans to re-implement the Redis core in Rust as such.
That's a much more ambitious undertaking. I don't think the core.
Just
I don't think
that's all. Okay,
I mean, maybe. I don't think they would turn it down.
Hi, do spill
maybe portions of the core. That's like debate that's happening like in the Linux community, right? Should we have some Rust code in the Linux kernel?
People, you heard it first. The most popular cache on the planet is partially being re-implemented in Rust going forward. No, jokes aside. Sorry, you continue.
Okay, so I do want to I'm sorry to butt in here, but like Rust is being used in some really interesting ways in Valky. There's a client library called Glide, Valky Glide. And normally a client library is implemented in the language in which you're trying to use that client library in, right? You would write a client library for Java in Java. You'd write a client library for Python in Python. But this Glide client library, which works for both Redis and Valky, it's designed for Valky, but it's written in Rust, and it uses like FFI interfaces to be able to interface with the different languages. So it's a Python, Java, Go, and I feel like I'm leaving one out. Client library that's written in Rust, right? Like so Rust is getting all over Valky.
FFF was standing for the foreign function interface.
Yeah, interface. Yeah.
Essentially a library that allows you to construct APIs in a different programming language than C, more or less on the fly. I'm simplifying things. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good definition. Sorry, I kind of threw that out there. But like, so between modules and client libraries, and you see it quite a bit. I mean, in some of the kind of new modules that we've been working on in Valky, they're also implemented in Rust, right? So,
yes.
Dmitry, does Valky LDAP use your SDK?
Yes. Yeah. So there are 2 new modules that have been built, and there are 2 new Valky modules that were released this year that are using the Valky modules Rust SDK. One is Valky LDAP, and the other one is Valky Bloom, and they're both what we call official modules. So they are on the Valky GitHub project page, and they are officially supported.
Bloom,
but there's still other modules like in C. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a module in C and a module in Rust running on the same server. And even you can even have a use case where one module written in Rust depends on another module written in C. All of this is supported by the underlying module APIs.
Bloom, of course, being one of the older modules in the original Redis implementation. But and I reckon that's a re-implementation of said module in Rust.
Yes, there was the original Redis module for Bloom, I believe. There was also some other modules for like time series and graph.
Absolutely.
Some of them didn't take off. So again, at some point, it is possible that the Valky community will say, hey, let's do a Valky module for graph. And maybe it'll be done and I would personally be interested in doing that in Rust.
Well, you know about that one, right? You know what's going on with that, right?
No. What?
So
we had him on the show, yeah.
You had some people. Redis Graph got spun off into Falcor.
Yes. Yeah. I met the folks behind it. Yeah.
And I think they're re-implementing it in Rust.
Yeah, funny enough, actually, there was an episode on Falcor DB in the last couple of months. Details, of course, will be in the show notes in case you missed it.
Dimitri, I wanted to check with you. So are we now saying that the Rust SDK is equivalent, covering the whole module API?
Almost all. There may be a couple of small changes. Have been wanting to just kind of do a very thorough review.
Okay.
And obviously, as new stuff is added in Valky 8, or Valky 9, we'll be adding more stuff. But yeah, at this point, the current version of the SDK 019 is almost pretty well compatible with everything that the module SDK, with the module API itself offers.
And going back to the LDAP module, what exactly, because that wasn't one of the original Redis modules, what exactly?
I can tell you all about it if you like.
No, I mean, why don't we let Dmitry spill the beans?
Well, actually, I don't have as much context. I worked with one of the engineers who developed it, but again, I reviewed the code. I'm like, oh, cool, it's LDAP integration.
No, I wrote the design. I wrote the design for LDAP, so I can probably tell you a little bit about it. But anyway,
it basically uses the underlying authentication mechanisms in the Valky Rust SDK. For example, there's a concept of callback, which was implemented, I believe it was in Redis 7.2. Yes, and therefore it's available in Valky 7.2. And like I said, it takes advantage of a lot of the functionality that was recently added to the Valky module Rust SDK, particularly the authentication callbacks.
We should probably do that we should have done at the beginning. Martin, full disclosure, works for a company called Martin?
Pacona.
Doing what?
Yeah. Doing Valky tech lead.
Yes, I believe
we should have done this earlier, people. Sorry about this. If Martin talks about Valky, he's in the loop on things.
How do you know?
Yeah, I believe Ricardo. You work pretty closely with the Ricardo, right?
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. So I mean, in short, the LDAP module, as Dmitry already mentioned, uses the mechanism where authentication can be handed off to a module and then back to Valky to say this is a valid authenticated user.
kind of hijacks the auth, which is kind of cool. I was like looking at it the other day. I was like, oh, well, that makes so much sense now compared to all sorts of chicanery people had to do
the
system.
auth callback is nice. If you don't have auth callback, you have to use some funky stuff with filters.
And before this gets even more technical, companies out there who are really looking for a Valky expert and have gotten the cold shoulder from Karl and Dmitry, simply send a mail to feedback@linuxinhouse.eu, because Martin will get this email eventually, so you can poach him if you're so inclined.
Not to worry. But yeah, we should probably mention the fact that these the Bloom, the Search, and the JSON are complete re-implementations, right? They are not just forks of the original.
The Valky Bloom is nothing in common with the original Redis Bloom.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they do have the same API, right?
Of course. Yes. The goal is to make the API compatible. So if you're coming from Redis with the Redis version of Bloom to Valky to the Valky version of Bloom, all the commands will be compatible. And the same, by the way,
there is one difference between on the
one difference.
There's like scan, dump, and
further, Kyle. We should probably explain what the Bloom module does before we put the last listener to sleep here.
Oh, I can talk about probabilistic data structures for
keep it to 2 hours, please.
Actually, we have data structures as well, don't we?
No, I mean, in the sense, what does Bloom do? As in the module.
Bloom is a probabilistic data structure that allows you to test for presence in a given set with actually having to store that set, right? It uses hashing algorithms to go through and be able to probabilistically determine if something's there. It's kind of magical. It's one of the great joys of computer science.
It's very space efficient. It can give you a false positive, but it'll never give you a false negative. So when it says yes, it's really a strong maybe, but when it says no, it's a guaranteed no.
So you kept the semantics of the original Bloom module of Redis, essentially.
The APIs are compatible, except I think Kyle mentioned the one minor difference.
It's like, it's not something that anybody who isn't very, very deeply involved with it would ever touch. So for all intents and purposes, but there is one command that's like slightly different between the two of them.
That's usually the fact that these are implementations, right? But if we, for example, look at the search module that was built for Valky, the main purpose of the initial release was around vector search, right? So is that because of do we see a shift in use cases for Valky there that people are using it more for those type of use cases? Is that the reason that the search module came out with that first?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think there was a lot of interest from the contributors, and just looking at some of the stuff came from, there was the main contributors for the search module were Google and AWS, and they had differing implementations of it. And I think where they saw the most opportunity was in the vector search, vector similarity search area. So I think it's interesting because, you think about like who uses Valky. It's not necessarily people who are every day using LLMs, right? Or implementing these type of things that you would traditionally associate with vector search. So in some ways it makes it kind of a new field for Valky. But there are the kind of traditional things, like you can do fraud detection with vector search very efficiently. And that's something that's like really something that you need something like Valky to be, real time, and something you can put kind of deeply into your application to detect fraud. And that works really well for something like vector search.
Mentioning vector search here, if I take a look at the Redis website, I do see an awful lot of positioning, so to speak, with regards to, cache is still there and it's great. Cache has been existing for the last 10 plus years. Fine, all great. But the new kid on the block is actually vector similarity. Needless to say, that closely relates to inference for something called neural networks, never mind large language models, which Redis as a company is aggressively going after when it comes down to capturing new markets. Given the postings of a guy called Salvatore Sanfilippo after he rejoined Redis on LinkedIn, it's probably fair to say that Redis is tackling that market both from a commercial/enterprise perspective, never mind community angle. Any thoughts on that with regards to the things that you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago?
Well, you forgot to mention what Salvatore did in his break when he wasn't working for Redis Labs.
He wrote sci-fi novels and some other things.
He wrote sci-fi novels about AI. And
okay.
I got him the translator from Italian to English. It's a friend of my wife's who's and does that sort of thing. Anyway, so the English version, like I helped facilitate that for Salvatore. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been an interest for him. And I think, I mean, obviously, if you pay attention to trends in tech, everybody wants to throw all money that they can at AI stuff for good or bad, right? And I have to wonder if it's truly like they have. I don't know. I have no idea what they do internally. Do they have a large number of users asking for this, or is it that there's a lot of people who will give money to it? I don't know, right? Like I think that maybe there's probably somewhere between those two. Certainly, people are looking to implement those things very, very rapidly. So I don't know. I mean, I think for us, I mean, there are obviously people who want this, and it is driving it. So for our implementation, the VSS and Valky. But as well, I think that some of it there was a lot of people who thought that they could really do it well for Valky VSS. So I think that's why I kind of went there first.
So there is no similarity between what Redis is offering in the vector similarity space and the things that Valky is thinking about from a functional/API compatibility perspective, even, I'm tempted to say?
So the VSS, the Valky Search VSS component does work with, there's very similar, I don't know actually how they match up in the query language. Off the top of my head, I haven't looked that far into it. But you can take code from Redis.
Yeah, it's very similar. There are a few small differences, but it's used the same FT commands and things like that. Yeah.
I see.
It's ironic because FT is supposed to be full text search, but like now, there is no full text search. It is just vector similarity.
Well, that's the point, though, isn't it? About there's the whole kind of compatibility question, not just about the Valky Redis and the modules, but also the client libraries, right? Because you mentioned Glide being a new library that supports both, but there are clearly differences emerging. The things like the hash expiry that Redis added before Valky, which I know is being worked on, but so do we think that these libraries will always be interchangeable for both, let's say, servers, or is that the goal? Do you think?
I think it's so complicated, right? Like when I look at that, when it comes down to it, the actual protocol is called RESP, and it's RESP.
It's actually pretty simple.
Yeah. It's actually, I think it's elegant. Like if I was to say the one thing that Redis did absolutely right in its early years was get the protocol and make it super small. It's not based on HTTP. It's very elegant. And so
which is essentially the initial wire protocol between the client and the server side of Redis, going back, I think, about at least 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
All those days ago. Sorry.
It's so little overhead too. It's just, when you start looking at the overhead of some protocols, you just go, wait a minute, I'm wasting a lot. And we know people cache things that are really small. So why would you send more, headers and things like that to retrieve 24 bytes? So I think that they carry that forward. So as long as that happens. Now, who knows what could happen? The client libraries are the Redis client libraries that are controlled by Redis. There are a number that they have under their control. They could put things in it tomorrow to foul things up, and we're going to work our way around it. It's hard to tell the difference between the servers technically. If you take a look at how they report But all sorts of things can happen with that regard. So we do have the client libraries. You shouldn't have to if you have an application running Redis right now. You can just move it over to Valky. Like they speak such similar dialects, you wouldn't know the difference. The API commands are the same. You can move over. In a few years, is there going to be a REST 4? Is there going to be like huge divergence in these two things? I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think the aim though is to maintain compatibility. So people who have stuff running right now, they can keep it running for years and years and years and years to come with Valky.
So, given the fact that I'm apparently the only one not involved with Valky on a technical/product level, let me play the devil's advocate here. Where do you see Valky in a year? Never mind 5 years' time. Will Valky actually have conquered the world in comparison to Redis? I reckon, given the Linux Foundation sponsorship and all the rest of it, it won't be subject to bit rot. That's for sure. It's probably fair to say. But where Valky will be with regards to, in comparison to the original Redis code base, any thoughts?
It's funny. I was going to say I don't have a crystal ball. And I was literally playing with a crystal award that I got from Redis Labs on my desk. So I can look into that, and it still says Redis Labs. But
Kai, give it a shot, by all means.
Yeah. I think if you're thinking about what the long-term bet is, like, do you bet on something that is supported by multitude of organizations that has a lot of engineering behind it, across different things. So there's no one point of failure, right? Like that's something that definitely goes in Valky's support. And we've heard very clearly that people want to run these things for long periods of times, right? Like, some of this stuff is like embedded on cell phone towers where you cannot, just rip something out willy-nilly. There's regulations and there's remote access that is difficult to get to. Stuff like that we have a very long view of it, right? So I think to that degree, yeah, we're going to be around for very, very long. I don't know what Redis is going to do. Who knows? That's not my viewpoint on it. But I think that fundamentally Valky's here to serve its users, and I think there's going to be people who are going to want to do these things for decades and decades to come.
Yeah, it's definitely going to live for a long time. But what will happen to Valky? How will they diverge from Redis? That's a hard prediction to make.
I mean, it's going to be interesting because if actually some members of the community are actively thinking about, similar to Linux, I might add, reimagining parts of the core in Rust, that's a very interesting perspective, especially from a scalability perspective / something that the hyperscalers especially would be interested in, offering this as a managed service. People, you heard it here first. Okay, jokes aside, it's probably time now. I mean, we could talk about this for hours in terms of the next 4 or 5 hours, going into technical details and all the rest of it, but unfortunately, we don't have the time. So let's wrap this up. Any final thoughts, Kyle, Dmitry? I'm explicitly excluding Martin now because Martin is one of the hosts. And he works at Percona. So Dmitry and Kyle, go ahead, sorry.
I mean, if you're interested in Valky, go to valky.io, VALKEY.io. And if you are on Google, thank you. If you're on Google and you search for Valky and it says, "Do you mean Valley?" You don't mean Valley, you mean Valky.
Yes, that's in retrospect, the name was a little. I mean, it's a good name, Valky, Keyval. Kind of a fun play. There's a GitHub issue where people were proposing all kinds of names. If anybody's interested in checking that out. Valky does
make sense because it's a key value store at the end of the day, because that's exactly where Redis came from about 16 years ago with regards to doing the all in memory. And funny enough, a couple of years later, you're looking at the most used cache code base on the planet as such. And it's still there. Just take a look at the project requirements on GitHub. Which project is requiring Redis /Valky as a caching solution? It's all over the place. Still, after all those years, hasn't changed.
And people love it for that reason, right? And I think this is one of the interesting things is that we have so many people who use it, and they just kind of keep in the background. It works. And then they like come back later, like, what? Something happened? So, you're probably running Redis and you probably should be running Valky. It's what I would tell people, like take a look inside your tech stack. It's in there. You should switch to Valky.
Full disclosure, Linux In-laws is using this as a caching solution for quite a few components in our tech stack. Nextcloud probably being the most prominent example, never mind some other stuff, as in launch code acceleration that we couldn't possibly talk about, publicly anyway. Jokes aside, it's probably now a time for the epoxies to wrap this up, unless there are any final thoughts with regard to world domination and all the rest of it. If that's not the case, let's take it to the epoxies. So, Dmitry, let's start with Dmitry. What's your POX, Dmitry, as in pick of the week?
Our pick of the week? Oh, gosh. I can't think of anything. Just too busy at work.
I mean, the one thing comes to mind. What about the original Redis Rust crate that started the whole mayhem all those years ago? And just a thought.
Well, there's two, again.
No, I'm talking about the original Rust crate.
Right, but are you talking about the module SDK or the Redis? Because if you Google Redis Rust, you will most likely come across the Rust client. So if you're building a Rust application,
I'm actually talking about the module crate.
The module crate. No,
exactly.
The original. Yeah. Okay. So just glad we clarified it. So the
just
original Redis
as a
module.
thought, yes.
No, I mean again, the guys who built it did a really nice work, and we're building on top of it.
So that's his proximity. I'm joking. Pick anything.
It's a beautiful weather in Seattle, and I'm looking forward to having a lovely weekend for the Father's Day in America.
So
it's Sunday.
So that would be the butterflies, I think, in New South Wales, who are in charge of the weather on the northwest coast of the US, if I'm completely mistaken. The ones in Singapore are in charge of the weather for Central Europe, if memory serves correct. But anyway, okay, over to you, Kyle. What's your POX?
So I think last time I was on the show, I gave like a bonkers answer to this. I think something like I was talking about storage.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody remembers that, but please don't go back and find it. So my pick of the week is actually something kind of interesting. WWDC just happened at the time of recording, and buried inside of that is actually something kind of interesting. So the next version of macOS will have a Linux VM in it. So you'll be able to run.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So no more like, creaky things that launch like multi-gigabyte Linux distros and like make your laptop just chug around. There's a like super lightweight Linux distro that starts up in like milliseconds. It's super cool. That's going to be a big thing. And Apple's running it as an open source project. So you can like contribute to it. And they're like looking for contributors. So that's like, to me, I'm like, oh, everything's changed. I don't have to like close Podman Desktop every time I, open my laptop and all that stuff. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be like a big quality of life for my like work machine, which is the Mac. And it's nice to be able to just say, I can run a container without having to launch the world. So that's my pick of the week.
Excellent. Martin, over to you.
Oh, okay. Well, if we're on that subject, I do like WSL.
Are you serious, Martin? It's a Windows thing.
I know, but you can run a million different OSs in no time. It's
a million. I mean,
yeah. Well, not
last time I counted, you look at 132,716, but not a million anyway. But it doesn't matter. Okay,
a few of them now. It's quite handy if you need to build something in it for a different release. The
website people is called distrowatch.com or org or something. Details, of course, are in the show notes. Okay, back to much more serious issues, Martin. What's your box? And I don't want to hear WSL.
I do like WSL.
Okay. Jesus Christ. Okay, fair enough. Okay, with
you
that.
heard it here first. Yeah.
If Martin,
if you have a proprietary operating system, you want to run WSL.
Okay, fair enough. If Martin doesn't change his mind. Okay, I think this is the first episode that has all technical boxes in it. Because I'm tempted to say that actually I wouldn't call it a box as such, but Salvatore, if you're listening, kudos to you. because he created something that still rocks the boat, never mind the world. Valky or Redis or not, you build a caching solution that still makes the difference. And thank you. And with that, with these philosophical remarks, Kaya, Dmitry, thank you for being here.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure to have you. And
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. And hope to see you back in about 2 months' time to report to give a status. To give a status update on the world domination thing.
Okay.
Always someone talking about my world domination. Yeah.
Kind of exactly.
All
Thank
right.
you for being here and speak to you soon. Take care. Okay, Martin, we do have more feedback from Dirk.
Yes.
Dirk sent in yes.
Carry on.
Dirk sent in yes new images. But Dirk, while we do appreciate your images, unfortunately, and Martin may have
images we were looking for.
in addition to that, yes, and you see, Martin keeps firing marketing departments.
Yes.
And without marketing departments, unfortunately, we do not have the means in place to update the websites. In addition to the fact that Martin has quite a firm stand on not changing the website until we retire.
Indeed. It's
In about, 25, 30 years' time, right?
Oh, no, a bit more longer than that, I would have thought.
So, Dirk, jokes aside,
Thanks for the offer.
Yes, thank you very much for sending in the artwork. But unfortunately, as I said, we are in no position to consider this. And with the lack of additional staff and people who are listening and want to send resumes, don't bother. Simply because even if you get an offer, you will have your resignation letter in terms of not resignation, but rather termination letter.
No. Look at it this way. They can at least put on their CV that they worked at Nintendo, right, for 5 minutes.
Yes, but exactly for 5 minutes. Exactly. But you see, I mean, if you're so inclined to have this as part of your LinkedIn resume, but I mean, yes, I mean, of course, it would boost our reputation in terms of, I worked 5 minutes at Linux in-laws, but it's not great from a future employer's perspective because if we will get serious about accounting, human resources, and all the rest of it, people won't bother. People won't bother to send in resumes because if you go by these LinkedIn profiles, if you just keep working 5 minutes at that company, podcast, right? Because we're not even a company yet, why bother in the first place? But Dirk, thank you very much for sending this in. Keep up the good work, and I hope you will find a project where you could put your excellent talent to good use.
Yes.
And exactly, I mean, if you need a reference, Dirk, just simply reach out. The in-laws will be more than happy to provide. Yeah. Exactly. The in-laws will be more than happy to provide you with a reference, no problem. This is the Linux in-laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you liked this feature presentation. If so, please spread the word. If not, please let us know. Feedback at linuxinlaws.eu.